The hall was cold, marble-bright, and heavy with cameras. Delegations whispered in half-lit rows beneath flags that hung like silent verdicts. At center stage, two podiums faced each other across a strip of polished floor, more dueling ground than forum. When Benjamin Netanyahu stepped forward, the lights sharpened, and a hush fell that felt like a held breath. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "We own your future," he said, measured, almost casual, as if stating a market fact. The sentence slid across microphones, through cables, into millions of living rooms. Heads tilted. Pens froze. Somewhere, a translator swallowed before choosing the words. Ibrahim Traoré didn't move at first. He stood in his army jacket, dark cloth, clean lines, a shoulder patch catching the light, watching the words settle like dust. He could hear the hall's noises in layers, the whir of lenses, the soft click of bracelets, a throat cleared 2 rows back. He had been called many things, young, reckless, impossible, but never breathless. He stepped forward. "Not while we breathe." It wasn't shouted. It didn't need drama. The power came from the stillness around it, the idea that breath itself could be a border, a law, a continent's consent. A murmur rolled the length of the hall. Traoré gripped the podium's edge with one hand, as if pinning the moment to the floor. "For generations," he continued, voice steady, "our tomorrows were priced by others. Our gold weighed on foreign scales. Our votes audited by distant hands. But futures are not contracts. Futures are children learning under light. Farmers pumping clean water. Cities powered by our sun. Futures breathe with us, or not at all." Netanyahu's jaw tightened, small, practiced. He lifted a page, then set it down again, the paper's edge making a crisp sound that microphones caught. "Authority," he said, "is earned by stability." "Stability," Traoré answered, "isn't a leash." Cameras swung between them like metronomes. In the back rows, a cluster of young African aides leaned forward, eyes bright, phones gripped but forgotten. Above them, the flags didn't move, but the room did, an axis tilting from expectation to possibility. Netanyahu's smile was thin. "You mistake poetry for power." Traoré's reply came like a door clicking shut, "You mistake power for permission." Somewhere, applause started, soft, then gathering. The moderator's gavel tapped once, twice, a brittle rhythm. But the line had been drawn in the oldest law on earth, breath in, breath out, a future claimed in the space between. A tremor of whispers rippled through the tiers as the moderator recovered his voice, inviting measured exchange. Measured was a fragile word in a room like this. Netanyahu's fingers framed his notes but his eyes never left Traoré. "Breath," he said, "doesn't build grids, doesn't deter insurgents, doesn't keep markets open." The consonants were clipped, the cadence that of a man who had stood at many podiums under harsher lights. Power is responsibility. Responsibility means leverage. Leverage means future. That is the order of the world. Order. The syllable sat in the air like a polished stone. Traoré let the silence do its work before he touched the mic, almost gently. "You speak of order as if it were weather," he said, "but we remember who wrote the calendar." He didn't list grievances. He painted scenes. A clinic's generator coughing itself empty while a tanker full of diesel waited for a signature that never came. A farmer walking past a transmission tower that blazed like a promise yet fed only minds bound for overseas ships. A student tracing formulas by candlelight the color of old honey. "Our breath powers those lives," he said. "Not leverage. Not threats. Not the old contracts that price human possibility per kilowatt." Netanyahu's smile returned, corrected by years of media training. "Romance will not wire a continent," he said. "Alliances will." "Partnerships, yes," Traoré answered. "Parole, no." The young aides in the back row leaned in further, as if the floor itself were tilting toward the stage. Cameras caught a detail, the fray just beginning on Traoré's right cuff, thread gleaming like a thin ray in the spotlights. Imperfection made him more real, and reality made his words heavier. "Let me be plain," Netanyahu continued, pages turning with surgical neatness. "Security unlocks investment. Without it, your independence is a slogan on a poster. You will return, to lenders, to donors, to us." Traoré didn't blink. "You confuse a revolving door with a future," he said. "We have been trained to circle. We are learning to walk straight." A murmur like surf. The moderator's gavel ticked. Somewhere high in the rafters, a light warmed, tinting the flags in a faint gold that no one had ordered. On feeds across 3 continents, captions bloomed, "Not while we breathe." Traoré lifted his palm, not to stop the room, but to settle it. "We will work with anyone who respects what breath is," he said, voice lowering until the microphones leaned to meet it. "Life. Consent. The right to refuse. Own our future. You could not carry it." The hall was breathing with tension now, each word carrying the weight of stone. Netanyahu straightened, fingers pressed together as if in prayer but eyes sharp as flint. "Do not mistake applause for power," he said, voice steadier than the murmurs gathering around him. "Crowds cheer passion. Investors trust control. And control, Mr. Traoré, is what determines tomorrow." He leaned into the microphone, a subtle gesture of dominance. "You may refuse our aid. You may even refuse our hand. But you cannot refuse the reality that without us, you walk barefoot on a world paved by others." Gasps. Notes scratched quickly across pads. Cameras narrowed their lenses to Netanyahu's expression, a mix of certainty and performance. Then Traoré raised his head. He didn't hurry, didn't try to compete with volume. "Barefoot, yes," he began softly. "But our feet remember soil. They remember rivers that cut stone. They remember the weight of chains broken by our fathers and mothers." His voice lifted, each sentence threading through the hall like iron wire. "Do you believe that without your boots, we cannot stand? We were standing long before you came. And we will still be standing when your boots wear thin." A pause deepened the silence. It wasn't the emptiness of fear, it was the fullness of recognition. Delegates shifted. A South American minister whispered to her aide, nodding. An African journalist raised his phone higher, streaming live to thousands already commenting in fire and thunder emojis. Netanyahu's lips tightened, but his jaw refused to yield. "Strength without discipline collapses," he said, eyes narrowing. "Discipline," Traoré countered, "is not obedience. Discipline is remembering the breath of your people and never selling it." The moderator tapped the gavel again, but even he seemed reluctant to interrupt. The room had become a courtroom, and each reply was evidence weighed not just by those present, but by millions watching beyond the glass. And in that moment, though neither man moved closer, the gap between the podiums looked smaller than ever, 2 futures staring at each other, neither willing to blink. The gavel tapped again, sharp against the echoing chamber, but the applause had already started. It wasn't thunderous, not yet, but scattered hands came together from across the delegations, bold enough to break protocol. A ripple of sound moved through the room like water seeping through cracks. Netanyahu didn't look at the clapping delegates. His gaze remained fixed on Traoré, the hint of a smirk curling at the corner of his mouth. "Applause doesn't feed families," he said coldly. "Applause doesn't protect borders. You speak well, Mr. Traoré, but words are feathers in the wind. It is we who build walls, lay roads, defend skies. Without us, your independence is only ink drying on paper." He leaned forward, voice sharpened to a blade. "We own the maps, and the world follows them." Traoré tilted his head slightly, as though weighing the words. His expression didn't break, but his hands gripped the podium with a strength visible even from the back rows. Maps, he began, voice low but growing with each syllable, are drawn by men who fear rivers. But rivers carve themselves, without asking permission. Africa is that river. And rivers cannot be owned. Not by pen. Not by treaty. Not by threat. The applause grew louder, more confident, swelling into something that made Netanyahu's smirk falter for a heartbeat. Cameras flashed, capturing every twitch of expression. In the side aisles, aides whispered frantically into phones as hashtags began to climb across screens worldwide. Traoré leaned closer to his microphone. "If you think our independence is paper," he said, "then try to burn it. You will find that it breathes. And fire cannot consume breath." The moderator froze mid-motion, gavel lifted but useless, as the room erupted into cheers that broke every rule of diplomatic decorum. For the first time that evening, Netanyahu's hand tightened around his notes, not as a gesture of control, but of frustration. The duel had shifted. This was no longer just words. It was a clash of legitimacy, one built on history's debts, the other on a continent's breath. The chamber had turned into something rawer than diplomacy, closer to a courtroom of history itself. Netanyahu, unwilling to surrender ground, lifted his chin and let his voice strike harder, as if each syllable could reset the room's balance. "Do not speak to me of rivers," he said, the echo firm, almost thunderous. "Rivers flood. They drown. They destroy. Order builds dams, directs the flow, ensures life where there would be chaos. Without order, your people will suffer. And whether you admit it or not, it is we who have the tools to enforce that order." There was a stillness in the air, one that wasn't silence, but anticipation. Delegates leaned forward, breaths held. Was this a warning? Or a threat veiled in metaphor? Traoré's eyes narrowed, not in fear, but in defiance sharpened by centuries of memory. His reply was slower this time, but each word carried the force of something carved into stone. "Dams," he said, "are not eternal. They crack when their builders forget the river's strength. You speak of order, but what you mean is control. What you call tools, we know as chains. And we will not wear them again." The words didn't just land, they struck. A pulse of applause erupted, louder this time, fueled by something beyond politics. It was the sound of resonance, of shared defiance. African delegates stood straighter. South American ministers nodded in quiet solidarity. Even a few European aides could be seen exchanging nervous glances, sensing the shift in the air. Netanyahu tapped his papers with a rigid hand, the only sign of agitation betraying the calm mask on his face. "You are playing with fire," he said, voice dropping lower, meant only for the microphone and Traoré. "And you," Traoré answered, voice steady, "still believe fire belongs to those who first held the match. It never did. It belongs to whoever dares to stand in the flames and still breathe." The hall quaked with the reaction, some with outrage, some with admiration, but none with indifference. Across the world, captions bloomed on live streams, "Not while we breathe." The duel was no longer confined to two podiums. It had become a mirror, showing the world two visions of tomorrow, both demanding to be believed. By now, the atmosphere inside the chamber was no longer one of polite diplomacy. It had shifted into a duel that felt historic, each phrase landing like a strike across the table of nations. Netanyahu adjusted his tie, his face a mask of iron, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed him. "You speak boldly," he said, his tone dipped in warning, "but boldness without power is noise. And noise is drowned out when the real engines of the world begin to move. Finance. Trade. Security. These are not speeches, Mr. Traoré, they are systems. And systems crush those who stand in their way." His words hit like a hammer, sending ripples of murmurs across the hall. Was this an open threat? Was he suggesting Africa's voice could be silenced by markets and military alike? Traoré did not flinch. His voice rose, not in anger, but in clarity. Systems, he said, are built by men who believe they can outlive the people. But systems fall. Empires fall. Towers fall. And every time they fall, it is not by the weight of armies but by the breath of those who refuse to bow. The room erupted, louder than before. Delegates from across the global south were on their feet, some clapping, others chanting softly in support. Africa rises, someone whispered audibly, caught on a nearby microphone and sent echoing through live streams worldwide. Netanyahu gripped the podium now, his voice sharper, almost desperate to regain control. And when your breath fails, he pressed. When your resistance costs your people everything? Will you still call it freedom, or will you call it ruin? Traoré leaned forward, his eyes burning with defiance. When we fall standing. And when we rise together. That is freedom. That is tomorrow. And no map, no threat, no declaration can take it from us. The roar of the crowd broke protocol entirely, delegates ignoring the moderator's futile gavel. Hashtags surged globally, hashtag not while we breathe, hashtag Africa speaks, hashtag Traoré versus Netanyahu. The duel was no longer words in a hall, it was history being broadcast in real time, watched by millions, weighed by generations. By the time the moderator finally gave up trying to silence the hall, the debate had already escaped the walls of the summit. Screens across the globe lit up with live translations, memes, and bold headlines: Traoré versus Netanyahu, clash over Africa's future. Netanyahu, realizing that the chamber itself was slipping from his grip, tried to shift his words outward, not just to Traoré, but to the watching world. Do not mistake applause for strength, he declared, raising his voice so the cameras could catch every syllable. This is not about pride, it is about survival. Without alliances, without structure, Africa will collapse under its own weight. And when it does, who will carry the burden? The same nations applauding now will walk away. Only we have stayed through history. It was a clever pivot. One that sought to remind the world of dependency, of aid, of influence. Some delegates nodded, recognizing the weight of realpolitik in his words. But Traoré did not hesitate. His voice cut through the noise like steel. Stayed? You stayed to take. You stayed to dictate. You stayed to remind us of debts we never owed. And yet, here we stand, alive, unbroken, unowned. If collapse is what you predict, then understand this: we will collapse into our own soil, not into your chains. The chamber erupted again, this time louder, deeper, the applause merging with chants rising from delegations. Africa rises. Africa rises. The sound was no longer confined to the summit, the chant echoed from streets in Ouagadougou, in Dakar, in Johannesburg, where crowds had gathered around giant outdoor screens. Netanyahu's jaw tightened, but his eyes darted toward the cameras. He understood, the narrative had escaped his hands. Traoré, seizing the moment, raised his fist slightly, not in anger but in declaration. We do not bow, he said. Not while we breathe. The phrase had already become more than a retort. It was now a slogan, a movement, a wave crashing across continents in real time. The chants inside the hall were no longer just background noise, they had become the heartbeat of something larger. Diplomats glanced nervously at the cameras, knowing that every frame was being broadcast live to millions worldwide. The summit had ceased to be a diplomatic discussion, it was now a spectacle of defiance, a moment etched into history. Netanyahu, realizing he was losing not only the argument but the optics, leaned hard into his final card. His voice cut sharp, calculated. The world is not moved by slogans, he declared, eyes narrowing at Traoré. The world is moved by power. And power is not with those who chant. Power lies with those who can decide where money flows, where weapons point, where borders bend. Do you really think words can stand against that? The chamber hushed, as if awaiting the counterpunch. Traoré did not wait. He straightened, shoulders squared, his voice steady yet blazing with conviction. Power, he said, is not in banks, nor in bombs, nor in borders. Power is in people. And people are watching. From the streets of Africa, from villages, from cities, millions who refuse to be erased. You think chants are noise? They are the sound of tomorrow. They are the sound of your empires breaking. The audience exploded in applause, louder than any moment before. Delegates stood, some pounding their desks, others raising fists in solidarity. Across the globe, live feeds showed African youth chanting in unison, echoing Traoré's words back through the screens, "Not while we breathe." Netanyahu's hand tightened into a fist on the podium, but he said nothing. For the first time, his silence was louder than his words. And in that silence, Traoré raised his voice once more. Not just to Netanyahu, but to every ear tuned into history. You claim to own the future. Then know this, the future is already here. And it does not belong to you. The moment was seismic. Social media blazed, headlines multiplied, and the phrase carved itself into banners and posts within minutes. The duel was nearing its climax, and the world had chosen its side. The chamber vibrated with energy. Cameras zoomed in on every twitch of Netanyahu's face, every flicker of Traoré's eyes. The duel had outgrown words, it was about image, posture, silence itself. Netanyahu finally spoke, his tone lower, more measured, but the weight of desperation edged through. Be careful what you promise your people, Traoré. Dreams are beautiful, but they do not build nations. They do not shield from hunger, they do not guard from war. Without those who hold the levers of global order, you may find your people crushed beneath the very dreams you've given them. It was an argument meant to sound like wisdom, an elder lecturing a child. Yet, to many, it dripped with arrogance. Traoré did not smile, did not flinch. He looked directly at Netanyahu, his voice carrying a grave finality. You mistake us for children asking permission. We are not asking. We are building. Brick by brick, hand by hand, with or without your approval. You speak of hunger, of war, but who profits most when they come? Not us. Not Africa. The ones who profit are the same ones who now tremble because they know the harvest of their control is ending. The delegates leaned in, caught in the gravity of the words. Then Traoré stepped back, his eyes sweeping the room, his voice rising. The future is not owned, it is earned. And it is earned by those who breathe free. You asked what happens when our breath fails? Know this, even if one breath ends, 1,000,000 more will rise in its place. You cannot kill tomorrow. The chamber erupted, applause, shouts, chants. Even delegates who had remained quiet stood, swept into the tidal wave of the moment. Netanyahu's silence was total. His rebuttal was gone, drowned beneath the roar of a world that had heard a new voice. And as the chants of "Not while we breathe" shook the walls, history recorded its verdict. As the summit drew to a close, the cameras remained fixed on Ibrahim Traoré. Netanyahu had stepped back into the shadows of his delegation, his earlier bravado now muted, eclipsed by the tidal wave of voices echoing in unison, "Not while we breathe." Journalists scrambled in the hallways, sending headlines across every corner of the globe. Africa finds its voice. Traoré's words shake global order. Across Africa, young people filled streets, waving flags, painting murals, their chants reverberating like a heartbeat that no border could contain. Traoré stood before the assembly one last time, his tone no longer confrontational, but resolute, steady, almost prophetic. What happened here today is not a victory for one man or one nation. It is a victory for truth. For too long, we were told our future belonged to others. Today, we claimed it. Not through conquest, not through wealth, but through the simple truth that our destiny is ours, and it cannot be bought, stolen, or silenced. His words rang out, heavy with permanence. The applause that followed was not explosive like before, it was steady, rolling, enduring, the sound of respect rather than reaction. As the cameras cut away, the image that remained was unforgettable: Netanyahu seated in silence, his shoulders stiff, his eyes fixed downward. And Traoré, standing tall, his hand raised, not in anger, but in defiance and hope. Outside, the world had already chosen its symbol. Posters, chants, and hashtags spread with unstoppable momentum. Not while we breathe. What began as a clash of words had become a global rallying cry. And history would remember it not as the day Netanyahu declared ownership of the future, but as the day Africa answered, and the world listened.